paper is very different from the sort of impact evaluations that you would have come across. I sort of got a little bit fed up of doing impact evaluations, and I decided, let me actually look at these women who we sort of think have made it. So, microcredit does help some women, we do know that. And this is what this paper is all about. So I have followed these women for about 11 years, and I try and see if we can learn something from their experience to sort of reflect upon policy and research agendas. So from financial inclusion to empowerment. So let's follow the women who make it. I think it's useful to situate this research within the wider context of the linkages, of the research linkages between microcredit and women's empowerment. Does microcredit empower women? We know the answer to this question. There is no clear answer. The earlier literature was extremely polarized. So there were yeas and there were nays. So there were two ends of the debate. And this heavy polarization actually has resulted in quite a few systematic reviews. I mean, one of the Campbell reviews Marin and Richard were involved in, and that review looked at microcredit and its link to women's control over expenditure. And there is another Campbell review, which is coming out this year or early next year, looking at SHGs, self-help groups, and their impact on female empowerment. And I had a small part to play in that as a reviewer. So I think a lot of this work has come out because of the heavily polarized literature that we found in the early days. But now I think there's a bit more of consensus emerging out of this literature. And the consensus, if you have to summarize it in a single sentence, would be simply to say that microcredit is not a magic bullet. So that's my tribute to Naila, because she's not here. So that was a sentence coined by her. Microcredit is not a magic bullet. In other words, there are several other things that are required for it to work. So simply putting it, the understanding that we have today is that it does not work for everyone. In other words, it actually does work for some. So whichever side of the coin you want to pick, you can. So that is my starting point. So that is the starting point of my paper. So I accept that it works for some people. And how do we go about identifying these people? Now, without overburdening ourselves with the semantics of the word empowerment, because that itself is a debate, and you can have a presentation on that alone, I'm not going to overburden myself with that. I am going to actually pick a particular strand in the literature. There are several important strands that have come out of this literature. I can't go into all of those. I won't have time. Like Richard, I'll be kicked out of the stage. But I will focus on one strand, and that is purely because it comes out of my previous work. So a lot of my previous work, well, some of my previous work, has argued that it is the loan use that matters. It's not loan procurement, but how women use their loan that actually matters. So the main findings of this research are that most of women's loans are fungible. They go into the household, they sort of disappear. So we find that 80% of women's loans are used by the households. So I think that in 80% of the cases, women's loans are used by the households. So they disappear into either household assets, so productive usage, or they disappear into household consumption. And the asset gap between genders is increasing because of this, because mainly household assets are owned by the husbands, but women do not have sort of productive rights in these assets. And I'll come to that point a little bit. However, there are a few women, so what's happening with these 80%, put them to the side now, but they are 20%, roughly around 20%, 16 point something, who are able to use their loans in a way that challenges norms. So these women end up investing their loans in their own businesses. In businesses they actually manage on their own, or they jointly manage with other women. So these women are able to use their loans in ways that challenge the patriarchal norms surrounding income and time use. And it is these women that I'm interested in. And if you focus only on these, the findings that come out of my previous research show that they have a respectable independent source of income. They don't have to rely on their husbands or their sons. And they have increased the value of their work time. That means they have moved from work that pays badly or work that is in bad condition to work that pays well, or work that has flexible conditions, that does not have bad conditions associated with it. They do not also have to recourse to degrading or disempowering ways of repayment. And this is the thing that I'd really like to focus on, which means that they don't have to suddenly enter the labor market in very bad conditions in order to repay their loans. They don't have to sell their small assets like utensils and goats and so on to repay their loans. They can rely on their businesses to repay their loans. Okay, now the focus on loan use, I'm going to illustrate and I'm going to support that focus using just a single illustration. And that is by drawing a link between loan use and loan repayment. So this is a table that I have taken from a previous paper of mine. Here you find 4 different types of loan users. So women can either use their loans in self-managed businesses, they can use them in family businesses, they can use them to enhance household land, which usually is in the name of the husband, not usually, about 99% of the times, or they can use it for household consumption. And on the other hand, you find sources of repayment. This is, they're repaying from self-managed business, they're repaying from family farm or business, own wages, sale of assets, and this is just the total number of cases. So now, if you look at this, just 82 women, that my rough 20% of women, using their loans in self-managed business. Of these women, more than 85% of them were able to repay their loans using their income from their own businesses. Now contrast that number with these numbers. Okay? Women who gave up their loans for family use, as in to use either on their husband's businesses, farm businesses, or to enhance male land, which is essentially buying an irrigation pump, that was mainly the use, or to consume, could not rely on these sources for repayment. So they could not rely on their husband's business for repayment. What they had to do is rely on their own wages. So several of these women reported having to start wage laboring when they had never actually done that. Wage laboring is associated with very low pay and bad working conditions, absolutely no flexibility, etc., etc. So they had never really exposed themselves to those kind of working conditions, and for the very first time these women were finding that they had to do it to counter the pressures that they faced from their credit groups for repayment. So this one small figure is telling, and this tells you that women who are able to use their loans on own businesses seem to be women who we can identify as the ones who made it. And my focus on loan use, I am simply supporting that focus by this single illustration. There's another thing that comes out of this table quite clearly. Women are using their loans on family businesses and to enhance male land, but what they are doing is exposing themselves to debt. So in other words, the asset gap between the genders is increasing. So men here are becoming asset owners and women here are becoming debt owners. And that sort of division, this separation between men and women becomes quite clear when you try and link up loan use and loan repayment. Okay, so now let's look at the research questions. So my research questions are, who are these women? I am very much focused, I'm not looking at the negative stories here, I'm very much focused on the positive stories. Who are these women? Are they different from others? And here we are focused only on the observables. We can't talk about, intrinsic differences that we can't observe. What defines and separates their experiences from others? And can we learn anything from these women for both policy and research? So those are sort of 4 broad research questions that I ask in this study. My data comes from Andhra Pradesh, which is iconic with microfinance in India. it's sort of almost synonymous. The Indian microfinance movement started in Andhra Pradesh, and you must have heard about the microfinance crisis that everybody is talking about. That also happened in Andhra Pradesh. Now, there is a bit of a difference. I need to give you a slight background. For those of you who are familiar with India's microfinance movement, you don't need this background, but for those of you who are not, I'll just sort of talk briefly about it. India's microfinance movement is very different from that which Bangladesh experienced or which other South Asian countries are experiencing. It is mainly state-led. So the biggest movement is the SHG bank linkage movement. The biggest microfinance movement is called the SHG bank linkage movement. It is state-funded, it's state-subsidized and state-backed. And the microfinance crisis that we hear so much about is limited to the private MFIs. So the private MFIs got hit by regulations that the state brought in because of malpractices and so on. And the state microfinance movement still happened to be as strong as it was before. It did face some sort of repercussions as a result of the MFI crisis, but it's in business as usual. So that's India, and that's Andhra Pradesh. That's where the data comes from villages in Andhra Pradesh. The survey, it was a household survey. It was a large household survey done in 2003, 2002-2003, sponsored by DFID. Then a smaller follow-up in 2005 by Newton Trust. And then a full follow-up was funded by British Academy in 2011. And then finally in 2013, we had a smaller follow-up where we just followed those 82 women that we were interested in. The original sample is about 400 households from 25 SHGs, so a fairly small number of SHGs. We had, the sample was not big, but it was quite intense. We interviewed every member of the SHG because we have, we were interested in the social network dynamics. They were interviewed individually by 2 enumerators, and a number of individual and group discussions happened as well. So are women who make it different? I mean, I could talk about data collection quite a lot. I'm just not sure exactly what aspects I should focus on because there's so much to talk about. So if there are any questions on data collection, I'll be happy to take them at the end. Are women who make it different? Now here, the important thing to remember is that are these women richer? Those are the kind of questions we are asking. So we are focused only on the observables. We cannot answer things that we cannot really observe. More educated? Are they older women with sons? And so on. So those are the sort of parameters that we are interested in. Now, let's look at these women. So what we do is we use a logic regression to understand the determinants of loan use. So the dependent variable in this regression here is women's loan use. So if the woman is using her loan on her own business, then she gets a value of 1. If she does not use it on her own business, then she gets a value of 0. Now, to address endogeneity, we do something really simple. We only look at women. So we have a sample of about 400 women. We only look at those who joined the program in 1998-99. So it's a reduced sample. The reason why we focus only on that year is because a lot of women joined in that year. So we still, even though we were working with a reduced sample, we still had a fair number that we could do some work with. So the number of women we are working with is now 277. So the full sample is 397. Now, yes, the answer is these women are different. They are older, they are better educated, they are from better off households. So this is quality of housing, and they seem to be from richer households, and they're definitely better educated. So those two things come out. But the most important finding is the strongest finding that I want to focus on, and that is the finding on peers' loan use. Now this variable measures the proportion of women in your group who also invest in own business. So what this result is telling us is that women are definitely influenced by what their group is doing, what other women from their group are doing. And it's more likely that the woman will invest in her own business if others in her group are also investing in their own business. So this means that the decisions made by the group are having an influence on the woman herself. So there is an issue with clustering. I'll sort of come to that a little later. But here, that result is of interest to us. So we know that the group certainly plays a part in the decision that woman is taking to invest in her own loan or not. And the likelihood of making this kind of investment goes up as more women in your group make the same decision. Now, for a minute, if we ignore the problem of endogeneity and decide to include the whole sample, then what happens to our results? We find that our results are more or less the same. There is some movement in variables of interest. For instance, education is no longer significant. But what's happened here is we have looked at the duration of program participation, and I feel that most of the impact of education has been sucked into that variable because more educated women might have joined the program early on, and therefore that has probably taken away the impact of education. But the variable that we are interested in, the coefficient of peers' loan use, still remains significant at less than 1%. So that is good news. So even if we look at the whole sample, ignoring endogeneity, we find that the results hold. Now, what do these 82 women do? Examining them more closely, looking at what their activities are, we find that about 16 of them do individual businesses, that is on their own. In some rare cases, there are two women working together, but in one or two cases, these women were like almost, dormant partners. They just happened to put in their money, but they were not active. So we classified those businesses as businesses that were individually run. They are women, however, who come together, and we found two types of businesses that groups run. One, we called it as cluster businesses. This is when just around five women came together. There's some variation, 5, 7, 8, and so on. But when all the women of the group come together, that is 12 or more, then we call it joint ventures. I've said 10 or more, but 15 is the size of the group. The smallest group was about 12, and the largest group was about 19. So there's a variation in there, but the smallest group is really 12, not 10 there. But I think 10 was the benchmark that we took. So we find two joint ventures. So what type of businesses are these? I mean, the individual businesses are really small businesses. They have very little future, very questionable sustainability. The individual loans are very small. They're just about 2,000 rupees, which roughly translates to about 20 pounds. So very, very small amounts of money. It's what you can do with that money is quite limited. You can probably buy a goat or two, and you can start a tea stall. So during our field work, every day, we used to be perplexed by, the decision of which tea stall to go and drink our tea at. Because there were 6 different women calling out from their individual tea stalls, come and drink tea from our tea stall. So we used to rotate ourselves every day, go to a different tea stall. So those kind of businesses, so it's a heavily saturated market that you're trying to compete in, and there is not much you can do with that small amount of money. Cluster businesses, slightly more sort of ambitious, cottage industry type of businesses. There's a bit more growth prospect there. Joint ventures were the most interesting. There were bigger, bolder ventures. Women had started doing things that they had never done before. So there was one fertilizer business and one rental business, renting for social events like, chairs and cooking equipment and so on. So there's sort of rental business that women had never tried before. So those kind of businesses we found. And what happened over the years? Over the 11 years that we've managed to track these women, what have they been doing? In 2011, before I talk about those 82 women, I'm just looking at what's happened to women in business. So we find that 116 women now use at least part of their loan on own business. So remember here, we are only tracking the women that we had interviewed in 2002. So the sample still remains the same. So we are not looking at a growing market. So it's not as if more and more women are coming into microcredit, and therefore some of them are sort of drifting into. So we are just sticking to our original sample. Of course, we've lost about 20 of those households through iteration. But of the 371 that we managed to interview in 2011, 116 use at least part of their loan in own business. 3 joint ventures have come up, 11 clusters and 18 individual businesses. But what about the 82 women that we had originally in our sample who were using their loan in this way? We managed to track about 79 of them, so we did pretty well. I wasn't expecting to be able to track so many, but so we did very well. Now, the women that we did not track, about 4 of them, we decided that their business had terminated, had closed down. I think that was the only decision that we could have taken with any confidence. So 11 individual businesses had closed down, or we could not trace them. 1 cluster had dismantled into 2 smaller clusters, and 1 of the clusters had become joint. So it seems that the prediction that we had earlier on, that women are competing in saturated markets, profitability is very low, and they are fighting to manage a sustainable business, we're all right. Because individual businesses do seem to not last very long. So 11 of them had closed down from the original number of 16. And here we have dismantled into 2 smaller clusters. 1 cluster had become joint, and the joint businesses were doing, I think there was some problem with 1 joint business, but both of them held on. So I know we don't have a huge number of observations, but on the face of it, this seems to suggest that joint businesses make sense. And that's what I'm trying to say here. Why do joint businesses make sense? I mean, some of the obvious points are there's more money, better business opportunities. You're talking about 2,000 rupees versus 30,000 rupees. Obviously, you can do a lot more with that. There's risk pooling. Women are more confident about difficult business decisions. There's evidence of risk taking. So women get into businesses that they would have never risked earlier. Complementary skills. Different women do different things. So someone might be good at doing the transactions in the market, whereas some other women might be not so good at selling, so they prefer to play a more backstage kind of role. So women are able to do things that they feel more comfortable with. Sharing of resources, and this thing came out quite obviously. I mean, women who were doing businesses together had a real incentive to support others, especially with sort of work-life balance as we understand it. And women were sort of helping out each other, okay, look, I'll take your children to school, you have to go to the market early, I'll do this for you, you do that for me, and I'll take care of your children if you have to do this, and I'll manage your shop, you don't have to shut it down, because I have a say in it as well, because I put my money towards it. So you don't find the shop shut between 2 and 3 when the woman has to go home and cook and do whatever. So there was that sort of sharing, which was much more apparent in joint businesses, and individual businesses missed out on these sort of collective opportunities. Now, if joint businesses were such a good thing, then why did not everybody start joint businesses? And we interviewed a lot of women who were running their own businesses to try and figure this out. And we got a number of different responses. It seems to be that women lacked trust. They did not trust each other in groups that did not want to go into joint businesses. There was lack of organizational skills, so there was probably effective leadership was lacking. Resistance from the household did not want women to go into businesses, and women wanted all the profits. So this was something quite interesting. A woman thought that she was really good at business, and other people were not so good, so why should she carry forward the weaker members from her group? She can work hard for herself and make all the profits and keep all the profits. She doesn't see why she should allow other people to free ride and carry them forward. So those were the kind of things that we got. So there are reasons why joint businesses are not attractive and not for everyone. And this is interesting. I think we need to do more research to understand why this is happening. Now, this is where I think things start getting exciting for the empowerment debate. And here we find that joint businesses not only make sense for business itself, but that they seem to have externalities. And I'm calling them externalities for the lack of a better word, but I'm sort of searching for a better word, if you like. Externalities, slide number 1. I have 2 slides. This is in and around the household. That's the only way I could categorize them. So we find that being in business together with other women from your credit group has an impact on reducing domestic violence. And here is a quote from G2W7, which means Group 2 Women 7. We are constantly discussing our business. It has become part of our lives. We are in and out of each other's house all the time, and my husband has noticed these changes and his behavior towards me has changed. So it seems that in small but significant ways, this collectiveness, because women have come together and are doing something together, has actually started having an impact in other ways. Averting small crises, and here if there is a problem in the house, it's not that I no longer have nobody to talk to. The first thing I will do is run to the shop. This is a group business that the group runs together. She would run to the shop because she knows that someone would be at the shop. There will be someone there who will know what to do. They solve big shop problems. They definitely know what to do for my house. And this, in some sense, has an impact on women's intra-household status, because she now has the ability to be able to rely on a group that's external to her household to avert small household crises. That this improves her status within the household. She suddenly now has the ability to resolve a small household crisis because she knows that she can rely on the group. And we also have evidence of bargaining for better wages, and that's the reason why I say in and around the household, not only inside but outside as well. Now, seasonal employment, seasonal wage laboring. Now, this is something quite interesting. We found that women who do business, who manage their own little whatever, also during peak times work in the labor market, because peak time wages are extremely high and it actually pays to work during peak time. Work is easy to come by, you can work quite close to your home, and you can juggle around things much more easily. So we find that women do both things, and during peak season they do work as wage laborers. And here I'm not good at bargaining for wages, so when I started work this season, I took one of my group members with me to fix the wages. She did all the talking, so I'm not so good at doing the talking, so I relied on one of my group members. And why did she help me out? Solidarity. She knows that I'm a business partner. Tomorrow she may need me, so she may need me to take care of her kids. I might not be so good at talking, but I have other things that I can give in return. So those are the kind of, so these are externalities that come because group is doing something together. And here, in the wider context, here we find, and this I put in slide 2, is that women seem to be actually challenging patriarchal norms surrounding women's time use, surrounding women's mobility. And this is quite interesting for me. Women in the market, if someone comes to argue with us because we have occupied a certain space in the market or because we are selling a certain type of good at a certain price, then we, all of us from the group, will get together. No one can dare to badmouth us in the bazaar. We will not stand for it. We will tell them who we are. If we don't support each other, who will? Some God will come or what? So they know that for practical reasons, they have to be collective. They have to come together in order to support each other in the marketplace. And women returning late, there are several examples of this in women who are doing joint businesses. Some days we are going home late. We make sure that everyone gets home safely. And sometimes, where we are aware that the situation can be volatile, we make sure that we go inside and see there is no trouble in the house. There's some research that tells that, the problem starts within 5 minutes of either of the spouses entering the household. So this, I found, is quite a practical strategy that the women have worked out for themselves. They go in, make sure that everything is okay, talk maybe for 2 minutes, make sure that there's no tension, and then come out. And the domestic violence does go down. My husband used to make trouble earlier when I returned home late, but now he has understood. He has understood that his wife has to work late sometimes, and that I'm going out for work and not to meet friends and have beedies. This is a local cigarette, like he does. So he knows that he goes out to do those things, but I'm actually going out to work and earn an income. So and these things are really interesting for me because I think that patriarchal norms surrounding women's time use, women's mobility are actually being influenced by this collective action by the group.
But 10 minutes left in the session.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll finish in about 2, I think. Okay, now this is the main point that I make in this paper, and that's to do with collective bargaining, or collective action, if you like. I think, if you look at the empowerment literature, one of the big problems with this literature, and this is what I have come to a conclusion about after sort of being exposed to this kind of work, is that empowerment is essentially viewed as an individual woman's achievement. So whether a woman is able to leverage credit and empower herself or not is down to herself. And education, assets, credit, all this are supposed to help her along the way. If she fails to empower herself, then this is centrally her problem. So we don't seem to understand the collective achievement of the group too well. Or rather, we are not bothered to. We don't want to understand. The collective achievements of credit groups are not well explored or well understood. Our evidence suggests that women do use collective bargaining or collective action, and they use this to empower themselves as individuals. So they know that, we have to support each other, but by doing that, they are actually shifting norms. And that is very interesting, what's going on there because of the group's collective action. I'd like to call it collective feminism, you may call it something else. Collective and individual bargaining seem to be much more intertwined than we realize. So women are relying on the group, knowing that the group will support, and the group does support because it has an incentive to support this woman. We're all doing business together, so let's support each other. We have at least two specific examples in our study that show this intertwining. One is to do with domestic violence. Women has external support, so this does come down. The other is to do with improved status within the household because she has now the ability to avert a small household crisis. Implications for policy and research, these are not so straightforward, they are much more complicated. I think the implication for policy is, it's easily said than done, is to recognize and validate collective action as a legitimate mechanism that leads to empowerment. So I think if the state wants to really empower women, then to provide a platform for collective action might be the way forward. So to recognize that collective action is useful and this must be encouraged is I think what comes out of this study. Research, it's quite clear to me from having looked at the literature that social network benefits of microfinance are not at all well understood. They tend to think of empowerment as individuals' achievement and not so much worry about what the group is doing or group dynamics, and I think that sort of focus needs to shift a little bit. I have put in those two words, pragmatic feminism and collective Marxism, because I was sort of looking at frameworks which to use meaningfully in order to study this type of thing. And I think really the work that we have done, in some sense, provides a meeting point for these two things, because what I think is going on here is pragmatism and collectivism. So women are, for pragmatic reasons, coming together. And I don't quite know as yet how meaningfully to combine these two frameworks, but I'm sort of working at it. Right, so that's it. Thank you.